I'm Camilla, 28, female, and just a few weeks ago, I inherited $56 million from my grandfather. This astonishing event, a life-altering gift from the man who was more of a parent to me than anyone, was immediately followed by an invitation from my mother to a family meeting. It was a meeting where I discovered she wasn't waiting with open arms, but with 3 lawyers, a stack of legal documents, and a heart full of greed. She came with threats, ready to dismantle my grandfather's last wishes, but she didn't know that my grandfather had armed me with something far stronger than her legal team. My grandfather Arthur was a titan, not just in the world of real estate development where he made his fortune, but in my life. He was a mountain of a man with a booming laugh and hands calloused from his early days in construction, hands that were surprisingly gentle when they taught me how to hold a pencil to sketch my first floor plan. He smelled of old books, fresh sawdust, and the spearmint gum he always carried in the pocket of his tweed jackets. To me, he was the architect of my world, the one who saw the foundation of who I was and helped me build upon it. My mother, Eleanor, was a different sort of architect. She specialized in social structures, building a life of carefully curated appearances, held together by the mortar of brunch fundraisers and charity galas. She was always beautiful, always perfectly dressed, but her presence in my life was more like that of a distant, critical landlord than a mother. Where my grandfather saw potential, my mother saw problems. Where he offered encouragement, she offered critique. This dynamic was the bedrock of my childhood. I remember being around 8 years old, spread out on the vast Persian rug in my grandfather's study. He had unrolled a massive blueprint for one of his new commercial buildings, the paper smelling crisp and important. He wasn't talking down to me, he was explaining it to me. He pointed out the support columns, the HVAC systems, the flow of human traffic through the lobby. "You see, Cammy," he'd rumbled, his voice full of passion, "a building isn't just concrete and steel, it's a living thing. It has to breathe, it has to work for the people inside it." I was mesmerized. My mother appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed, a frown etched onto her perfectly made-up face. "Arthur, really," she said, her voice tight with disapproval. "She'll get ink on her dress. Shouldn't she be playing with dolls? This is so unladylike." My grandfather didn't even look up. He just patted the blueprint beside him. "Nonsense, Eleanor. She's learning to build worlds. There's nothing more ladylike than that." He winked at me, and in that moment I felt seen. My mother sighed, a gust of disappointment, and walked away, the click of her heels on the hardwood floor sounding like a ticking clock. This pattern repeated itself throughout my life. My grandfather was my steadfast champion, my mother my reluctant spectator. The most painful example came on the day of my college graduation. I had just received my master's in architecture, the culmination of years of hard work, fueled by the passion he had ignited in me all those years ago on his study floor. As I walked across the stage, my eyes scanned the crowd. I found him easily. Arthur was sitting in the third row, beaming, his eyes shining with pride. He stood up, cupped his hands around his mouth, and yelled, "That's my girl," causing a ripple of laughter and applause around him. I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. My mother was not there. She had called the night before to inform me, not ask, that she couldn't possibly miss the annual fundraiser for the City Ballet, an event she was co-chairing. "You know how important this is, Camilla," she'd said, her tone implying that my graduation was, by comparison, trivial. "I'll see the pictures. Just make sure you stand up straight." The line went dead before I could respond. Later, I saw the pictures she was referring to, not of me, but of her in the society pages, smiling next to the mayor, a champagne flute in her hand. The contrast between her glittering, hollow world and the genuine pride on my grandfather's face was a chasm I knew could never be bridged. The final fracture occurred when I announced I was taking a position at a boutique architectural firm known for its sustainable, community-focused projects. It wasn't a large, corporate giant, but it was work I believed in. I told my mother over one of our rare, stilted dinners. She put her fork down with a clatter. "A boutique firm? Camilla, that's a hobby, not a career. With your education, your connections through your grandfather, you could be working at a top-tier global firm. What will people think?" Before I could defend myself, my grandfather, who had been listening quietly, spoke. His voice was calm but held an edge of steel. Eleanor, she is pursuing her Sipples, she's choosing integrity over prestige. I seem to recall that's a lesson I tried to teach you once. The air grew thick with unspoken history. My mother's face flushed. Don't you dare, she hissed. Don't you dare use him to justify her poor choices. She was referring to my father, a man I barely knew, who had left when I was a toddler, unable to live under the weight of Eleanor's expectations. I'm not justifying, Arthur said, his gaze unwavering. I'm celebrating. I am prouder of her for this choice than I would be for any other. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. My mother simply stood up, threw her napkin on the table, and left the room. A year later, my grandfather's health began to fail. His decline was rapid, and it was the most painful period of my life. I spent every possible moment I could at his bedside, reading to him, showing him my designs, or just sitting in comfortable silence. My mother's visits were brief and theatrical, filled with loud sighs and complaints about the hospital's decor. She was performing the role of the grieving daughter, but her eyes were always somewhere else. When he finally passed, a quiet grief settled over me, as vast and empty as a building stripped to its frame. The funeral was exactly as my mother wanted, a grand, public affair filled with the city's elite, all there to see and be seen. She delivered a flawless, tearless eulogy about her wonderful, generous father, a man I didn't recognize from her description. A week later, I was summoned to the office of Mr. Harrison, my grandfather's lawyer and lifelong friend. He was a kind, wizened man with eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 confidential conversations. The office was paneled in dark wood, smelling of leather and old paper. I assumed we were there for a formal, procedural reading of the will. I expected my mother to be there, but Mr. Harrison informed me he had met with her separately. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and looked at me with a gentle, solemn expression. "Camilla," he began, "Arthur was very specific in his instructions. He held you in the highest possible regard. He saw you not just as his granddaughter, but as his spiritual successor." He then slid a thick document across the polished desk. "He has left the entirety of his estate, its assets, properties, and liquid funds to you." I stared at him, uncomprehending. The whole thing, I don't understand." "The full amount, my dear," Mr. Harrison said softly. "After all taxes and duties, it comes to approximately $56 million. The number was so abstract, so impossibly large that it didn't register. It was like hearing a measurement in light years. All I could feel was the staggering weight of my grandfather's faith in me. He had bypassed his own daughter, his only child, and given everything to me. Tears welled in my eyes, not of joy, but of an overwhelming sense of love and responsibility. He hadn't just given me his fortune, he had given me his legacy. He believed I was the one who could build something good with it. As I sat there, stunned into silence, I had no idea that my mother was already plotting how to tear it all down. The days following the meeting with Mr. Harrison were a blur. The number $56 million floated in my mind like an untethered balloon, too immense to grasp. It didn't feel real. I went to work, sat at my drafting table, and stared at the lines on the paper, but my focus was gone. The world had tilted on its axis. The grief for my grandfather was now complicated by this enormous, terrifying responsibility he had placed on my shoulders. It was an act of profound love and trust, but it was also a burden that set me completely apart from the life I had known. My mother's reaction was, at first, a deafening silence. I knew Mr. Harrison had informed her of the will's contents, and I braced myself for an explosion. I expected a furious phone call, a barrage of accusations, a storm of maternal rage. But for 3 days there was nothing. The silence was more unnerving than any outburst. It was the quiet before a storm, the eerie calm as the pressure drops. Then on the 4th day my phone rang. Her name, Eleanor, flashed on the screen. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the green icon. Taking a deep breath, I answered. "Camilla, darling," she said. Her voice was unnaturally sweet, like honey laced with something bitter. It was the voice she used with wealthy donors and the wives of powerful men, a smooth, polished veneer that always set my teeth on edge. "Hello, Mother," I replied, keeping my own voice as neutral as possible. "I know things have been difficult lately," she cooed. "Grief does strange things to people, and I know the details of father's will must have come as quite a shock to you." "It was a surprise, yes," I said cautiously. "Well, I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued, her tone dripping with manufactured sincerity. "And I think it's important that we, as a family, stick together. We need to present a united front. Your grandfather would have wanted that." The invocation of his name felt like a violation. "I'd like you to come over to the house for dinner tomorrow night, just the two of us. We can talk things through, plan for the future. It's time we put everything on the table and figure this out together." A tiny, foolish part of me flickered with hope. Could this be it? Could the shock of my grandfather's death and his final, dramatic act have finally broken through her shell? Could she, for the first time, be reaching out to me as a daughter, not a disappointment? I knew, logically, that it was unlikely, but the deep-seated childhood yearning for a mother's approval was a powerful force. "Okay," I heard myself say, "I can be there." "Wonderful, darling," she chirped. 7 o'clock, I'm so looking forward to it." As soon as I hung up, a wave of dread washed over me, extinguishing that flicker of hope. Something felt wrong. Her sweetness was a performance, and I knew from a lifetime of experience that Alina only performed when she wanted something. My instincts told me to call the one person I could trust. I dialed Mr. Harrison's number. I explained my mother's sudden change in demeanor and her invitation to a family meeting. He was quiet on the other end of the line for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was grave. "Camilla, I want you to be very, very careful." "You think it's a trap," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I think your mother is a formidable woman when she feels her interests are threatened," he said diplomatically. Arthur knew this better than anyone. In fact, he anticipated it. "What do you mean?" "He left something for you. For this exact situation," Mr. Harrison explained. "He called it a contingency plan. I was instructed to give it to you only if Alina began to make things difficult. Her sudden invitation to a private meeting qualifies, in my opinion. Can you come by my office this afternoon?" A few hours later, I was back in the quiet, wood-paneled office. Mr. Harrison didn't waste any time. He retrieved a large, sealed manila envelope from a safe behind a framed print of a historic courthouse. It was thick and heavy. My name, Camilla, was written on the front in my grandfather's familiar, strong handwriting. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "I don't know the exact contents," Mr. Harrison admitted. "Arthur sealed it himself in my presence, but he told me what it was for. His instructions were explicit. You are not to open this unless Alina tries, through legal means or through coercion, to take what is rightfully yours. He said, if she forces your hand, this will be your strength." He called it his ace in the hole. I took the envelope from him. It felt warm, as if it still held some of my grandfather's energy. The weight of it was both terrifying and comforting. "He knew she would do this," I whispered, the realization settling in my stomach like a stone. "He knew she wouldn't just let it go." "He knew his daughter," Mr. Harrison said gently. "But more importantly, he knew you, Camilla. He trusted your strength, your intelligence, and your character. This," he said, tapping the envelope, "is not a weapon. It is a shield, one he fashioned for you himself. I hope you don't have to use it. But if you do, know that you are simply carrying out his final wishes to protect the legacy he entrusted to you." I drove home with the envelope sitting on the passenger seat, a silent, powerful guardian. The meeting with my mother now loomed not as a potential reconciliation, but as an inevitable confrontation. The hope was gone, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. My grandfather had seen this coming. He had known her so perfectly. And in his foresight, he had given me one last gift, one final tool to help me build my own future, free from the destructive architecture of my mother's designs. I didn't know what was in the envelope, but I knew I wasn't walking into her house unarmed. The following evening, I drove towards the house I had grown up in. It wasn't a home, not in the warm, comforting sense of the word. It was an estate, a grand, Georgian-style mansion my grandfather had built decades ago, set on acres of manicured lawns that rolled down to a small, private lake. After he moved into a more manageable residence in his later years, my mother had taken it over, and it had become the perfect stage for her life, impressive and imposing, but lacking a soul. As I pulled up the long, gravel driveway, a sense of foreboding settled over me. The house was blazing with light, every window a bright, unwelcoming square. It looked less like it was prepared for an intimate family dinner and more like it was hosting an event. I parked my modest car next to my mother's sleek, black luxury sedan, feeling small and out of place before I even stepped out. The heavy oak door swung open before I could ring the bell. A housekeeper I didn't recognize, a woman with a severe expression, nodded curtly and led me through the cavernous marble foyer. The air inside was chilled, despite the warm summer evening, and smelled faintly of lemon polish and my mother's expensive, cloying perfume. There were no sounds of cooking, no welcoming aromas from the kitchen. The silence was absolute, broken only by the echo of our footsteps. "Your mother is waiting for you in the study," the housekeeper said, gesturing towards the heavy, dark wood doors at the end of the hall. My grandfather's study, the one place in the house that had always been a sanctuary for me, filled with his books, his blueprints, his warmth. My mother rarely entered it when he was alive, claiming it was too stuffy. Her choosing it as our meeting place felt like a strategic invasion, a deliberate colonization of my sacred ground. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the cold brass handle. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The scene that greeted me stole the air from my lungs. The warm, cluttered study of my memories had been transformed. The cozy, worn leather armchairs had been pushed to the side. In the center of the room, under the harsh glare of the overhead chandelier, sat the long, polished mahogany library table. And at the table, my mother was not alone. She sat at the head of the table, a queen holding court. On her right sat two men and on her left another. All three were in their 50s, dressed in identical dark, expensive suits with pristine white shirts and silk ties. They had the predatory stillness of sharks, their faces impassive, their eyes sharp and assessing. Briefcases were on the floor beside their chairs. This wasn't a family meeting. It was a corporate boardroom. It was an ambush. "Camilla, darling, you're here," my mother said, her voice echoing the false sweetness from the phone call. She gestured gracefully to the single, empty chair at the far end of the table, directly opposite her. It felt less like an invitation and more like being called to the defendant's stand. "Mother," I said, my voice tight, "you said it would be just us." "And so it is," she smiled, a taut, unpleasant motion that didn't reach her eyes. "These gentlemen are simply here to help us navigate the complexities. Please allow me to introduce them. This is Mr. Vance, Mr. Sterling, and Mr. Croft. They are my, and by extension, the family's, legal advisors." The three men nodded in unison, their expressions unchanging. They didn't offer to shake my hand. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. I walked slowly to the chair, my bag containing the sealed envelope feeling like a lead weight. I sat down, my back ramrod straight, and placed the bag on the floor beside me, my hand never straying far from it. The trap had been sprung, just as Mr. Harrison had predicted. The hope I had so foolishly harbored was not just dead. It had been dissected and laid out on a cold, sterile slab. Eleanor let the silence stretch, a tactic she often used to create tension. Then she leaned forward, her maternal mask dissolving to reveal the cold, calculating woman beneath. "We need to talk about your grandfather," she began, her voice losing its feigned warmth and taking on a sharp, businesslike edge. "He was a brilliant man, but in his final years, he was not himself. He was sentimental, easily confused." Mr. Vance, the man seated directly to her right who appeared to be the leader, cleared his throat. He had a smooth, deep voice that sounded accustomed to charming juries and intimidating opponents. "Miss Camilla," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "what your mother is saying is that we have concerns about the validity of this recent will. The disposition of an estate of this size is a serious matter, not one to be left to the whims of an elderly man in a state of cognitive decline. My grandfather was perfectly lucid, I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. He knew exactly what he was doing. Did he? Mr. Sterling, the man on the left, chimed in. He was leaner than his colleague, with a ferret-like face. Did he understand the immense pressure he was putting on you, the complexities of managing such a vast portfolio? It's an incredible burden for someone of your inexperience. They were a well-rehearsed team. My mother played the concerned matriarch while her lawyers delivered the professional, patronizing blows. I looked from their cold, smug faces back to my mother. Her expression was one of complete control. This was her element. This was the architecture she truly understood: power, leverage, and intimidation. In this room, surrounded by her hired guns, she believed she had already won. The love I felt for my grandfather and the pain of his loss meant nothing here. They were just inconvenient emotions, to be swept aside in the pursuit of what she saw as her rightful property. And I was just the final obstacle to be removed. The air in the study grew colder, thicker. My mother sat back, a silent signal for her legal team to take the lead. Mr. Vance, the apparent ringleader, opened his briefcase with a soft click and retrieved a formidable stack of documents, bound in a neat, blue cover. He slid it down the polished surface of the table. It stopped directly in front of me with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel. "What your mother has graciously proposed," Mr. Vance began, his voice a low, persuasive hum, "is a solution. One that benefits everyone and, most importantly, protects the family legacy that your grandfather, Arthur, worked so hard to build." I stared at the thick document. The cover page was titled, "The Arthur Kensington Estate Trust, a Family Compact." It sounded so official, so reasonable. It was designed to look like a peace treaty. I knew it was a declaration of war. "We have taken the liberty of drafting a new arrangement," he continued, gesturing to the papers. "It establishes a trust that will manage all assets of the estate. Your mother, as the primary next of kin and a woman of considerable experience, will act as the principal trustee." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Sterling, the ferret-faced lawyer, leaned forward with a thin, patronizing smile. "You, of course, will be the primary beneficiary. The trust is designed to protect you. It will provide for all your needs, your lifestyle, your future endeavors. We have included a provision for a very generous monthly allowance, enough to allow you to pursue your architectural hobbies without the dreary concern of making a living." The insult was so precise, so clearly fed to him by my mother, that it felt like a physical slap. He had used her exact words. He was telling me that my career, my passion, the very thing my grandfather had nurtured in me, was nothing more than a childish pastime. "So you want me to sign over control of everything my grandfather left me," I said, stating the bald truth of their proposition, "in exchange for an allowance." "It's not an allowance, Camilla," my mother interjected, her voice laced with feigned patience, as if explaining something simple to a difficult child. "It's security, it's freedom. Freedom from the stress, the accountants, the taxes, the decisions. Do you have any idea what's involved in managing this kind of money? The vultures who will circle you. I am trying to protect you from that." It was a masterful performance. She was the loving mother, shielding her naive daughter from the cruel, complicated world of finance. But I could see the glint in her eyes. It wasn't protection she was offering. It was a cage, albeit a gilded one. When I didn't respond, the tone in the room shifted. The pretense of a friendly negotiation began to evaporate, replaced by a harder edge. "Let's be direct, Miss Camilla," Mr. Croft, the third lawyer who had been silent until now, spoke up. He had a gruff, imposing voice. "You have two choices here. You can sign this agreement tonight, and we can move forward as a united, prosperous family, or you can refuse." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "And if you refuse," he continued, "we will be left with no alternative but to formally contest the will. In court." Mr. Vance picked up the thread seamlessly. "A legal challenge would be unpleasant. We would have to call into question your grandfather's state of mind in his final months. We would subpoena his medical records, his nurses, his staff. We would have to paint a public picture of a confused old man who was perhaps unduly influenced by the person who spent the most time with him at the end. The implication was clear. They would drag my grandfather's name through the mud, and they would accuse me of manipulating him. My last, precious, private moments with him would be twisted into something ugly and transactional. It would be a long, messy, and very public process, Mr. Sterling added, his smile gone. The estate's assets would be frozen for the duration of the proceedings. It could take years. Years of legal fees, years of headlines in the paper. The family name, your mother's reputation, all of it would be damaged. Is that what you want? Is that what your grandfather would want? This was the final, brutal turn of the screw. They were using my love for my grandfather as a weapon against me. They were holding his dignity and his memory hostage. My mother delivered the finishing blow. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine, her voice dropping to an intense, emotional whisper. Camilla, this is tearing me apart, but I will do it if I have to, for the family. Don't be selfish. Don't let your pride destroy everything your grandfather built. Think about his legacy. He would want us to be united. Sign the papers. Let's end this unpleasantness and be a family again. For a dizzying moment, the weight of it all pressed down. And on me. The thought of a public court battle, of my grandfather's private decline being made public spectacle, of being painted as a manipulative villain, it was terrifying. A part of me screamed to just sign it, to give her the money, to make it all stop. I just wanted to go back to my quiet life, to my drafting table, to a world that made sense. The room felt like it was closing in, their four faces blurring into a single, monstrous entity of greed and pressure. I felt the walls of the study closing in. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and new threats. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I looked at the document, its pages filled with dense, impenetrable legal language that was designed to do one thing: strip me of my grandfather's gift. I looked at the three lawyers, their faces set like stone, vultures waiting patiently. And then, I looked at my mother. I searched her face for a flicker of something: doubt, love, even a hint of maternal conflict. I found nothing. Her expression was one of absolute certainty, of triumph. She saw my hesitation not as the pain of a grieving granddaughter being cornered, but as the weakening of an opponent's defenses. In her eyes, I wasn't her daughter, I was the final obstacle. This wasn't about protecting the family, it was about her winning. And in that cold, stark realization, something inside me shifted. The fear that had been choking me began to recede, replaced by a slow, burning anger. It was the anger of a lifetime of being misunderstood, underestimated, and dismissed. It was the anger of watching her perform motherhood instead of living it. But most of all, it was the anger that she would dare to weaponize my love for my grandfather against me. She didn't know him, not the real him. She didn't know the man who taught me that a building's integrity starts with its foundation, and that a person's integrity is no different. She didn't know the man who believed in me so fiercely that he entrusted me with his entire life's work. He hadn't given me this fortune because he was confused. He had given it to me because he was wise. He knew this day would come. He knew her. The memory of Mr. Harrison's voice echoed in my mind. He trusted your strength, your intelligence, and your character. The weight of the envelope in my bag by my feet was no longer a burden. It was an anchor. It was my grandfather's hand on my shoulder, steadying me. I lifted my gaze from my mother's face and let it sweep across her three lawyers. The fog of intimidation cleared from my mind. They were just men in suits, hired bullies. All their power was derived from the belief that I would be too scared, too weak, too overwhelmed to fight back. They were wrong. I took a slow, deep breath, letting it fill my lungs. The frantic drumming in my chest slowed to a steady, resolute beat. I pushed the monstrous stack of documents back across the polished table toward Mr. Vance. It slid to a stop in front of him. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a wrecking ball. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me in stunned disbelief. It was as if a piece of furniture had suddenly spoken. They had built this entire scenario on the absolute certainty of my capitulation. My refusal was not a variable they had accounted for. Mr. Vance was the first to recover. "I don't think you understand," he started to say. "Oh, I understand perfectly," I interrupted, my voice finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. "I understand that you've been hired to bully a grieving woman into signing away her inheritance. I understand that my mother is more interested in my grandfather's money than she ever was in him or me. And I understand that you are all about to be very, very disappointed." The color drained from my mother's face, replaced by a blotchy, furious red. Her carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. "How dare you," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "After everything I have done for you, the schools, the clothes, the life I gave you, I am your mother." "You gave me a roof over my head," I countered, my own voice rising to meet hers, fueled by years of repressed feelings. "Grandfather gave me a life. He gave me his time, he listened to me, he believed in me, something you never ever did. You weren't at my graduation, you called my career a hobby, and now you sit here and try to tell me this is for my own good. This has never been about me, it has always been about you. Your image, your status, and your insatiable desire for more." A shocked silence fell over the room again. The lawyers looked back and forth between us, their professional detachment wavering. This had moved beyond a legal negotiation and into raw, primal family warfare. Eleanor slammed her hand down on the table. "You ungrateful child, you have no idea what you're doing. I will not let you squander your grandfather's legacy on your pathetic little projects." Her words, meant to wound me, had the opposite effect. They solidified my resolve, my pathetic little projects. The work my grandfather had been so proud of, the finality of it all clicked into place. There was no relationship to save here. There was no bridge to be rebuilt. There was only this raw, ugly battle for control. And it was time for me to end it. As my mother's fury crested, her face contorted with a rage that stripped away the last vestiges of her elegant facade, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The storm I had dreaded my whole life was finally here, and I found that I was not afraid. I was ready. While she was still catching her breath from her tirade, I leaned down and reached into my bag. My fingers closed around the thick manila envelope. The paper felt solid, real. It was a tangible link to my grandfather, to his foresight, to his unwavering protection of me, even from beyond the grave. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. I placed the sealed envelope on the center of the mahogany table with a soft but definitive thud. It lay there between us, a plain, unassuming object that radiated an immense power. My mother stopped mid-sentence, her eyes fixing on it. The three lawyers leaned forward slightly, their curiosity piqued. "What is that?" Eleanor demanded, her voice still sharp but now tinged with a new note of uncertainty. "This," I said, my voice level and clear, "is from grandfather." I let that sink in. The lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. This was an unexpected piece on the chessboard. "He knew this would happen," I continued, looking directly at my mother. "He knew you, Eleanor. He knew you better than anyone, so he prepared a contingency. Mr. Harrison gave this to me. It's a copy. He holds the original in his office safe." I paused, making sure I had their complete and undivided attention. "It's a video message. A final statement from him. He wanted me to have it, just in case. Just in case his final wishes were not respected. Just in case you tried to do exactly what you are doing right now." Mr. Vance, the lead lawyer, scoffed, trying to regain control. "A video? That's sentimental nonsense. It has no legal standing. The court will." "It's not for the court," I cut him off, my gaze still locked on my mother. "It's for the public, the court of public opinion." A visible tremor went through my mother. Her face, which had been flushed with rage, was now becoming unnervingly pale. She understood the world of appearances and reputation better than anyone. It was the currency she dealt in. "He told Mr. Harrison that the video is in 2 parts," I went on, my voice dropping slightly, becoming more confidential, more menacing. "The first part is about me. He explains in his own words with his own voice exactly why he left his entire estate to me. He talks about our relationship, his pride in my work, his faith in my character. It would be very persuasive. It would make any attempt to paint him as confused or manipulated look exactly like what it is: a shameless, greedy lie. I saw a flicker of panic in the lawyer's eyes. Their entire case rested on the idea of an incompetent old man. A video of a passionate, lucid Arthur would demolish that argument before it ever reached a courtroom. But it's the second part of the video that you should be worried about, Mother, I said softly. Eleanor flinched as if I had struck her. What are you talking about? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know what's in the second part, I admitted truthfully. I haven't watched it, I have no desire to, but Grandfather gave Mr. Harrison a summary. He said it was a personal matter, a secret you've kept for a very long time, something from long before I was born, a secret that, if revealed, would not just damage your reputation. He said it would utterly and completely destroy it. Your charity boards, your social standing, everything you have built your entire life upon, would turn to ash. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. The three lawyers were no longer looking at me. They were all staring at their client, Eleanor, whose face had become a mask of pure, unadulterated fear. She knew. Whatever this secret was, she knew exactly what I was talking about. Mr. Sterling, the ferret-faced lawyer, finally broke the silence. He turned to my mother, his voice now stripped of its arrogance, replaced with genuine alarm. Eleanor, what is she talking about? What's on the video? My mother couldn't answer. She just stared at the envelope on the table as if it were a venomous snake. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had undergone a tectonic reversal. A few moments ago, they were the ones holding all the cards, issuing threats and demands. Now they were on the defensive, blindsided by a ghost. My grandfather's final, brilliant checkmate. I didn't need to know what the secret was. I just needed her to know that I could reveal it. The shield he had given me was also a sword. The atmosphere in the study had transformed from a high-pressure interrogation into the scene of a diffused bomb. The lawyers, who had been so aggressive and confident, now looked deeply uncomfortable. They kept glancing from the terrifyingly silent envelope to their client, whose composure had completely crumbled. The foundation of their attack, their belief in my weakness and their client's power, had been dynamited. I stood there, feeling taller than I ever had in my life. I was no longer the scared, cornered girl. I was Arthur Kensington's granddaughter, and I was in control. I looked at the lawyers, then back to my mother, who was still staring at the envelope, her face ashen. So, I said, my voice calm and firm, cutting through the thick tension, we can forget your family compact. Here are my terms. The lawyer stiffened. Mr. Vance opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. I'm not speaking to you, I am speaking to my mother. I walked around the table until I was standing beside her. I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life trying to shape me, control me, and diminish me. For the first time, I felt no fear of her. Only a deep, profound pity. First, I said, you will drop this. Immediately. All threats of contesting the will are over. You will instruct your legal team to stand down, and I will never hear from them again. I paused, waiting. Eleanor wouldn't meet my eyes. She just gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Second, I continued, you will not contact me about this inheritance ever again. Not by phone, not by email, not in person. The money is not a topic of discussion between us. It is off the table, permanently. We will not be a united, prosperous family because we are not a family. We are two people who happen to be related. The words were harsh, but they were true, and they needed to be said. A single tear finally traced a path down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of remorse. It was a tear of defeat. In return for your complete and total cooperation, I concluded, this envelope and the original video Mr. Harrison holds will remain sealed. Forever. Your secrets, whatever they are, will remain safe. Your world will remain intact, but it will no longer include me or my grandfather's legacy. I picked up the envelope from the table and slid it back into my bag. The symbolic weight of the action was immense. I was reclaiming what was mine and sealing her out. I turned to leave. I walked across the room, my footsteps sure and steady on the hardwood floor. With my hand on the doorknob, I stopped and looked back one last time. "You can keep the house, Mother," I said, my voice softer now, tinged with a final, weary sadness. "Grandfather wouldn't have wanted you to be without a home. But everything else, the fortune, the legacy, the responsibility, the future, that's all mine now. I'm going to do what he wanted. I'm going to build something good with it." Without waiting for a reply, I opened the door and walked out. I didn't look back. I strode through the cold, marble foyer and out the front door into the warm, fresh air of the summer night. It felt like I was breathing for the first time in my life. The weight on my chest, a weight I had carried since childhood, was gone. The drive away from the estate was surreal. The relationship with my mother was broken, perhaps irreparably. The pain of her betrayal was a sharp, clean wound, but the feeling of liberation was overwhelming. My grandfather's final gift wasn't just the $56 million. It was this moment. It was the strength he knew I had inside me, the strength to stand up to her, to define my own life, to be my own architect. He hadn't just left me money, he had set me free. In the weeks that followed, my mother's lawyers sent a single, terse letter to Mr. Harrison confirming they would not be proceeding with any legal action. As promised, I never heard from her about the money again. I didn't waste any time. I met with financial advisors, planners, and philanthropists. The first thing I did was establish the Arthur Kensington Foundation for Sustainable Architecture, an organization dedicated to funding innovative, community-focused projects and providing scholarships for underprivileged students who, like me, dreamed of building a better world. I know now that my grandfather saw the true blueprint of my character all along. The meeting in the study was my final test, and because of his love and foresight, I passed. I will spend the rest of my life honoring his legacy, not just with the fortune he left, but with the integrity he taught me. To anyone out there dealing with a manipulative family member, know that your strength is not determined by their approval. True strength comes from knowing your own worth and honoring the trust of those who genuinely love you. Sometimes, the most important thing you can build is a boundary.